Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. In just a minute, you'll see what we didn't show you last night from our interview with President Donald Trump. But first up, Federal District Court Judge Derek Watson of Hawaii yesterday blocked President Trump's revised executive order on immigration. He said it violated the First Amendment rights of Muslims not in this country, but around the world, including those who've never set foot in America. The order's foes were quick to celebrate their win.
You cannot snap your fingers and make intent to discriminate go away simply by substituting one document for another.
We felt compelled to assure that we will not tolerate discrimination.
They were trying even harder to mask what was a religious animus, and animus just means, you know, basically hostility.
This very, very important victory for the state of Hawaii and for the country of the United States of America.
One of those was the Attorney General of Hawaii. Well, President Trump, of course, blasted the ruling and signaled his intent to keep fighting for the executive order.
A judge has just blocked our executive order on travel and refugees coming into our country from certain countries. The order he blocked was a watered-down version of the first order. This is, in the opinion of many, an unprecedented judicial overreach.
Karen Tumlin is the legal director at the National Immigration Law Center, which supports Judge Watson's ruling, and she joins us now. Karen, thanks for coming on.
My pleasure. Looking forward to a respectful conversation, Tucker.
Oh, as always. I understand why people don't like the executive order, of course. We talked to a lot of people who don't. What I don't understand is the legal reasoning here. How does the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution apply to people in other countries who've never been here?
Well, actually, Tucker, in our case that was decided this morning by a district court judge in Maryland, the premise of the First Amendment argument actually is grounded in U.S. citizens and other residents who are inside of the country, but whose relatives are seeking to come in and who are Muslim.
Right, but they're not U.S. citizens and they're not in the country, but we're now expanding, or this judge or these judges are now expanding the coverage of the First Amendment to our Constitution to foreigners who aren't here, have never been here, and have no legal right to be here. How does that work?
Well, that's actually not what's working at all. So again, the Constitution, one of the things that's actually fundamental about it is that almost all of what we consider the Bill of Rights talks in language of persons. So
right.
Of course it doesn't protect only U.S. citizens. And like I was explaining, one of our plaintiffs in the case that was decided in the wee hours of the morning in Maryland involves individuals like Jane Doe 2, who is a permanent resident here in the United States and whose sister is abroad and who's seeking to come in as a refugee. Right. So to kind of twist and say these cases are only about folks outside of the U.S. with no connection here, who don't have family, who has a right to reunify is actually a misreading of the law.
Okay. Well, there's no constitutional right to reunify, as you know, and this decision is rooted in a reading of the Constitution, which, again, for the third time, I don't think I'm misreading it, extends that constitutional right to a non-citizen who's not in the country. That's not the traditional way we understand it. And my question is, does that mean that the other First Amendment rights, the right to the freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of the press, do we guarantee those also for people who aren't here? Think about the ramifications of this.
So here's what's really in the court's rulings. And so here we're talking, we have so far on Muslim Ban 2.0, 2 rulings, one in Hawaii and one in Maryland.
Right.
And what they say is a key principle of what our country was founded on is you can't have a state-sanctioned policy that disparages or disfavors a religion. And there's evidence that that's what Muslim Ban 1 and Muslim Ban 2 was intended to do with respect to Islam. And for that reason, it must be blocked. That's what happened in court.
So there, again, that doesn't get past the First Amendment problem, which I think going forward could be a huge, it's a massive obligation to the rest of the world that we should think through before we applaud this decision. But let's get to what you just said, the reasoning behind this decision. Now, I'm reading, this is the Hawaii decision. It says that the executive order was issued with a purpose to disfavor a particular religion in spite of its stated religiously neutral purpose. In other words, we're inferring the motive of the people who wrote it based on, I don't know, news stories, clairvoyance, our own deep insight into human nature. How exactly would they know that? I mean, that's kind of a reach, no?
Not at all. I mean, unfortunately, the truth is that there is an incredibly long trail of evidence from the president himself. When he was a candidate, when he was campaigning, he pledged that one of the key things he would do as president was to enact a far-reaching Muslim ban. And the courts have looked at all of this evidence on the campaign trail, in the executive order itself, statements made by the drafters afterwards, statements made by the president, and said this is the highly unique case where we can tell, and it's clear under the law, that this intent here was to disparage Islam and to ban Muslims.
It's just hilarious that they somehow know. I mean, first of all, this is not a far-reaching Muslim ban, as you know. It applies to 6 countries that do not constitute the majority or even close of Muslims around the world, but that they can know what's in the heart of the person who wrote it. I'm not sure that's a precedent we want to run with for future decisions, or maybe you think it is.
Well, I mean, I actually think it is. I mean, again, one of the beauties of the Constitution is you don't have to violate the constitutional rights of every person in the United States to violate the Constitution. If someone violates your free speech rights, Tucker, that's a violation, regardless of whether they violate mine.
Right. So I mean, I can see that you're making the argument that, you know, Trump has all kinds of bad intentions. Okay, we could debate that. You don't like the ban, fine. But I don't understand where in the Constitution it says that people from Somalia have a right to come to the United States. I haven't seen. Where is that?
So again, that's not what the courts are finding. What they're finding is in the Constitution, the Establishment Clause, which in fact, right, the founders of our country were fleeing religious persecution. And in their wisdom, they said, we don't want a government that either puts on a pedestal or disparages a certain religion, because we know what the consequences of that are. And that's what the decisions are saying. They're saying no one's above that basic constitutional boundary, even the president.
No, it's saying that no one around the world is not covered by the U.S. Constitution. And so, like, if you apply the standard, look, again, not just with reference to this case, but because court cases do establish precedents that future generations build upon, I think it's worth unpacking a little bit. So we've instituted bombing campaigns, more than 20 of them, over the past 25 years, against Muslim-majority countries. In fact, I think exclusively against Muslim-majority countries. And we've been doing that because of religious problems in those countries. Under this standard, a judge, some random judge somewhere could say, no, you cannot go to war, pick a country, Syria, Yemen, Somalia, because it has a disproportionate impact on Muslims. It's anti-Muslim. Don't you see that could be a problem?
Look, I actually think that's really extreme. I think that one thing that you and I can definitely both agree on is that we want this country to be safe, and we can agree on the rule of law. And unfortunately, you know, as someone who's before these courts all the time, that's not what you get from one decision, that you get this outrageous boundary stretch. What we've got from these decisions is, and again, taking the case that I've been working on, the court said your specific plaintiffs have a right to bring this lawsuit because of their connections to the United States, and based on the evidence, I see a violation here. I see an executive order based on its evidence that disparages Islam.
But look, you say that's, I'm stretching it. If you had told any person you meet on the street 2 years ago that some judge would say that Somalis who've never been to this country are covered by the U.S. First Amendment, you would get blank stares, and people would say that would never happen. Let me ask you this. Doesn't this empower judges in a way that's uncomfortable? So Trump has got over 100 judicial appointments to make, 123, I think. Probably mostly be conservative. What in 2 years, one of them decides, you know what, I don't like American abortion law. And I think it's discriminatory against unborn children, and I'm going to invalidate it unilaterally because I'm a judge, and now I have this power. I can change our immigration policy because I'm a judge. That's not the way the country's supposed to run, is it?
Well, that's not the way I view judges, right? I appear before judges all the time, and I don't see them adhering wildly to political beliefs. I see smart judges who've been appointed by presidents on both sides of the aisle. And so, again, I don't buy into that as the ramification. I think if you had told people 2 years ago that we would have a president who made it a hallmark of his campaign to disparage a religion and to make a difference between people in this country based on how they choose to pray, I think he would have gotten blank stares.
Okay, last question. So you think it's unconstitutional for the United States president or Congress, or how about citizens, to make a meaningful distinction between immigrants from Somalia and immigrants from Norway. We're not allowed to say there's a difference. There's a difference in effect on the people who already live here. That's unconstitutional?
At no time did I say that. That's the basic conflation. That's a problem with this executive order. What I'm saying is the fundamental principle of the First Amendment Establishment Clause is the U.S. government cannot favor or disparage a religion. You talked about countries.
So
I'm talking about freedom to pray.
So for like 20 years, the official U.S. policy was to give preference in emigration from the Soviet Union to the United States to Jews living in a very anti-Semitic world under Soviet communism. And that was our policy. Do you think that was unconstitutional?
I think you're citing the Lautenberg Amendment, which was duly passed by Congress after specific evidence of persecution of a specific group, and I do not think that was unconstitutional. I think it was a specific legislated bicameral response to a problem of persecution.
Not true. That was happening long before Frank Lautenberg was serving in the Senate. And it made common sense. These are people who are suffering because of their religion. I mean, religion played a role in the decision. And nobody said boo because it was the right thing to do. So, but that's unconstitutional now.
No, no one said that's unconstitutional now. That was based on findings of fact and a legislative process. This is the stroke of a presidential pen without those basic foundations.
All right. Karen, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you, Tucker.
We didn't show you all of yesterday's interview with President Trump. During our sit-down, we also asked him how he keeps busy after the day is done. Here's what he said. What do you do at the end of the day? What do you read? What do you watch?
Well, you know, I love to read. Actually, I'm looking at a book. I'm reading a book. I'm trying to get started. Every time I do about a half a page, I get a phone call that there's some emergency, this or that. But we're going to see the home of Andrew Jackson today in Tennessee, and I'm reading a book on Andrew Jackson. I love to read. I don't get to read very much, Tucker, because I'm working very hard on lots of different things, including getting costs down. The costs of our country are out of control, but we have a lot of great things happening. We have a lot of tremendous things happening. And remember this, when I came into this job, I inherited a mess. It was a mess in the Middle East. Whether you like it or not, the economy was very, very weak. You look at the 96 million people. You look at all of these people. Now, I have good work numbers. I have very good work numbers, you know, employment numbers, unemployment numbers. And so they say 4.6, 4.7, and I'm supposed to take a bow. But they're not really the numbers, because you have people that want jobs that have given up looking for jobs. And when you start adding those numbers onto your numbers, it's not really reflective of where I see. Those are the people, a lot of those people are the people that got me elected. They elected me. And I'm going to take care of those people. I'm here today because we're going to be opening up automobile plants in Michigan and Ohio and places that Pennsylvania, places where the plants have left, and not just automobiles, places where the plants have been stripped out of our country. The jobs have been absolutely destroyed by, I could say, stupid management. I could say politicians that didn't know what they were doing. Plants have moved to Mexico. You look at what's happened in Mexico. It's the 8th wonder of the world in terms of plants, in terms of what's happening with automobiles. It's going to stop. Now, hopefully we'll get along with Mexico. We're going to see what happens. But I will tell you, we cannot continue to close plants in Michigan and have them move to Mexico. Now, since I was president-elect, the word is out. You want to open a plant in Mexico, that's fine, but you're going to pay a very big import tax if you're going to bring that car back into this country. And you know what? Ford, General Motors, Fiat, so many others that we're going to see in a little while, they're not moving anymore. They're not going to be moving anymore. And I had my actual highest poll numbers today. You just saw that. It just came out. Because people see I'm working for them. Now, go back to your tax thing. I want to start that so badly because it's unfair. I paid a lot of tax. I paid $38 million in tax for that year where it was illegally given out, okay? I paid $38 million. But honestly, the percentage is a lower percentage. It's a lot of money, $38 million, but that's a lower percentage than somebody that's working in a factory someplace, and that should not be.
Up next, President Trump says he will be the final victor in the spat over whether President Obama wiretapped him. Charles Krauthammer here next to assess that. Also, MSNBC did its best to create a scandal this week out of a pretty innocuous tax return that Trump filed in 2005. We'll remind you that the real scandal is how NBC News secretly behaved during the last presidential election. Details ahead. Well, White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer got into it with the press today over President Trump's claim he was wiretapped by the former President Barack Obama. For more on that, we go to Trace Gallagher standing by. Hey, Trace.
Hey, Tucker, it wasn't exactly a rumble in the jungle, but it was a pretty good battle from the opening bell, or in this case, the opening question from ABC News Chief White House correspondent Jonathan Karl, who asked Sean Spicer about the House and Senate Intel committees, saying they didn't see any evidence of wiretapping. Watch.
That there was no, hold on. I understand that, Jonathan. And where was your passion and where was your concern when they all said that there was no connection to Russia? Where was it then? You crickets from you guys, because at the end of the day, when hold on. I'm making it. I'm trying to answer your question, Jonathan. If you can calm down.
After a few more counterpunches, Spicer spent the next 10 minutes quoting media, beginning with a New York Times piece on the Obama administration expanding the National Security Agency, which reads in part, quoting, "The new rules significantly relax longstanding limits on what the NSA may do with the information gathered by its most powerful surveillance operations, which are largely unregulated by American wiretapping laws." Then the briefing got combative again when CNN's Jim Acosta said he'd done plenty of reporting on this, and it's already, quote, all been looked at. Spicer called Acosta's comments, quote, cute, and questioned how he became such an expert on the subject. Here it is again.
Somehow, you seem to believe that you have all of this information. You've been read in on all of these things, which I find very interesting.
I have been read in by the FBI.
Well, so you're coming to some serious conclusions for a guy that has zero intelligence classified.
Well, give me some credit.
I'll give you some.
A little intelligence, maybe. But no,
clearance.
What I'm saying is that
I wasn't done. Clearance.
Those two
maybe both.
Acosta later tweeted that it was a troubling sign that Spicer wouldn't directly address the Senate Intel Committee's statement. Tucker.
Trace Gallagher, thanks. President Trump insisted in our interview yesterday that he will be vindicated in his claim that President Obama spied on him, wiretapped him, during the 2016 campaign. Why not wait to tweet about it until you can prove it? Don't you value your words when you can't provide evidence?
Well, because the New York Times wrote about it. You know, not that I respect the New York Times. I call it the failing New York Times. But they did write on January 20th using the word wiretap. Other people have come out with
right, but you're the president. You have the ability to gather all the evidence you want.
I do, but I think that, frankly, we have a lot right now. And I think if you watch... if you watched the Bret Baier and what he was saying and what he was talking about and how he mentioned the word wiretap, you would feel very confident that you could mention the name. He mentioned it, and other people have mentioned it. But if you take a look at some of the things written about wiretapping and eavesdropping, and don't forget, when I say wiretap, those words were in quotes. That really covers, because wiretapping is pretty old-fashioned stuff, but that really covers surveillance and many other things. And nobody ever talks about the fact that it was in quotes, but that's a very important thing. But wiretap covers a lot of different things. I think you're going to find some very interesting items coming to the forefront over the next 2 weeks.
Well, author, columnist, and American thinking man Charles Krauthammer joins us now. Charles, thanks a lot for coming on. I guess what bothers me about that is I think that it's overwhelmingly likely that electronic communications from Trump advisors were swept up by American intelligence agencies during the campaign, either for good reasons or bad. But I think it likely happened. But I think the White House's unwillingness to prove it distracts from that. It undervalues or undermines their case, but also it detracts from like a conversation we should be having about surveillance.
And it makes you question the credibility of the president on anything.
Right.
You know, he really should stop digging. We have now had the heads of the Senate and House Intelligence Committees, a Democrat and a Republican, come out and say they haven't seen a shred of evidence that this is true. There is nobody in the administration who will say this is true. They'll all say we have to investigate. Why? As you said in the question, you're the president. You pick up the phone. You call the head of the CIA, the FBI, the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence. You've got the answer at your fingertip. You don't need an investigation. Look, there's not a person in Washington who thinks that there actually was a wiretap, that this is true. The president, look, he seems to have a belief in conspiracy theories. This is, after all, a man who said that Ted Cruz's father was involved in some way with Lee Harvey Oswald. That's pretty Twilight Zone stuff. So this is a lot less kooky than that, but there is no evidence. But as you say, it detracts from the fact that we do know that there was legal wiretapping of Russian officials that might have swept up Americans in it, and there could have been, I would go one step beyond that and say there could have been improper handling. When Americans are swept up in that kind of legal wiretap of a foreigner, the intelligence agencies are supposed to cover up and to disguise the identity of the American to protect them. There could have been mishandling of this, particularly in the case of General Flynn, and that is, I think, an issue that ought to be raised.
Don't we know that happened? And I agree that it detracts from the imprecision of his words detracts from it. But all of us should be horrified that a private citizen, he was a private citizen then, was surveilled by the U.S. government and then destroyed, whatever you think of Flynn, by the leak of the transcript. I mean, isn't that a big deal?
And I think you could even say, if you want to talk conspiracies here, there appears to have been, and here's where the New York Times, the failing New York Times reported, that there appeared to have been a relaxing of the standards for releasing the names of the Americans who should be disguised and protected at the end of the Obama administration, and the spreading of that name so that Flynn, for example, ended up being exposed in a way he shouldn't have been. But I think it's really odd here, Tucker. We have two conspiracy theories. A, the wiretapping of Trump Tower. That didn't happen, and we're chasing our tails on this. The other is the collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians, the alleged collusion that Democrats have been jumping on. There is no evidence of that either. We just had today Mike Morell, who is sort of a pro-Clinton former deputy head of the CIA, saying there's smoke, but there's no fire here. Right. And the head of the DNI, Clapper, a guy who was at odds with Trump, had no reason to favor Trump. He says he hasn't seen a shred of evidence. So you have two conspiracy theories, huge investigations. The town is swept up in a frenzy on two accusations where there is no evidence.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the debt ceiling came and went, which is actually... Last question. Every time I talk to people on the intelligence committees who are charged with oversight of the intelligence agencies, they always strike me more as fanboys and defenders of those agencies rather than as people who are acting as a backstop against overreach and protecting our interests as the public. Why is that? Why the Stockholm Syndrome?
Well, they're not libertarians like you.
Well, I'm not really a libertarian. I'm an American who doesn't want people reading my email without a good reason.
Well, for them, look, let me speculate since I don't know, but it's never stopped me before. And I am a psychiatrist, and I'm allowed to do this kind of stuff. You know, they probably get exposed to all kinds of hair-raising intelligence.
Yes.
All kinds of weird plots we never hear of, scary plots that are stopped at the last minute. So imagine you're hearing that every week. So you might be slightly more inclined to see the sacrifice of privacy, given the fact that you're exposed to the threats out there. So in drawing the line...
No, I think that's a totally fair point.
That might be the reason they do that.
Yeah. Charles Krauthammer, always with the right answer. Thank you.
I try.
Well, this week, MSNBC tried to bring down President Trump using a 2005 tax return. It didn't go so well. We'll discuss other efforts by the NBC News team to influence the opinion of the public on politics. Stay tuned for that. Page Democrat Bernie Sanders somehow got away with. Find his accountant, please, quick. I need his number. There was no scandal here, at least one involving Trump. But that doesn't mean there was no scandal at MSNBC. Indeed, there is. And as it happens, we revealed it at almost the precise moment they pulled their nothing burger off the grill. Remember the leak of the Access Hollywood tape in October, 2 days before the presidential debate? The one that wound up dominating the campaign more than any other single issue that year? Well, it turns out the whole thing was a setup devised by NBC executives in an effort to derail the Trump campaign. As we reported, that tape, which was NBC property, shot by NBC cameramen for an NBC show on NBC property, was stealthily leaked to a Washington Post reporter. Why is that? Well, it didn't happen by accident. According to our sources at the network, NBC News Division head Andrew Lack knew about it. So did Today Show anchor Matt Lauer. The company's motive was pretty straightforward: keep Trump from becoming president. What didn't work, of course, but that doesn't change the fact that one of the biggest news networks in the world took an active side in a closely fought political race and then lied about it repeatedly. They posed as journalists, but they acted like political hacks. Well, we've asked NBC to explain, but they have, weirdly, refused comment. Perhaps they're too busy concocting a new Putin-centered conspiracy theory to explain how, despite their fervent efforts, Hillary Clinton lost the race anyway. Joining us now from New York City is radio show host Tammy Bruce. Hey, Tammy.
Hey, Tucker. Nice to be on.
Well, what I find odd is that news organizations are, by definition, committed to openness. So if you say to a news organization, hey, we think you've done something dishonest, something stealthy and feline, and then lied about it, don't they have an obligation to at least respond and explain?
Well, they would if they held those same standards, and of course you do. The problem is to not project onto these other entities. It's clear that some still hold those standards and others do not. With NBC, the problem is clear, and you saw it not just with the Access Hollywood tape, which in many ways backfired. Clearly, the only person harmed was Billy Bush. He lost his job. This was a dynamic where originally people thought, well, it had to have been a rogue staffer, whereas in fact, look, it was, as you mentioned, people in the NBC News division. The man, by the way, who was running the Today Show at the time, just last month was promoted to heading up NBC News in its entirety, so they seem to have liked what it was that transpired somehow. And then the Rachel Maddow debacle. And what happens is there's a desperation to, in fact, since this was personal, they had an interest in influencing the election. And when you get desperate and suddenly news is not the issue or a genuine critique is not the issue, you're going to make mistakes. You're not going to know where to stop. And your judgment in and of itself is clouded. And that is what's, of course, informing this entire framework for at least that one network, if not others.
Well, right, because they put their political aims above their job as purveyors of news. It was a real story. It was a real tape. You could debate, whether or not Trump knew on camera or whatever, but it was a real thing. And they didn't run it on their own network. They sent it to a competitor, the Washington Post, because they wanted the outcome to be the same, and they didn't want to be tied to what was clearly a partisan act.
Yes, and there was some debate even then, as I've read in some reports, that there was, California laws about taping people are different than other states, and it would have been risky, and they wanted to maybe take out Billy Bush's comments, and it got all messy, and it was just easier to move it to another friendly outlet that would, in fact, move it. This is when I was with Now and on the Left. When I was working with media, this is how it worked. If you couldn't find an outlet that would handle something first, you would get it to another outlet that then would do it, and then everyone else would pick it up from there. And this is the nature of collusion. It's been going on for quite some time. And so for NBC, and this is, of course, a message for everyone, is that you can do ultimately whatever you want. You can see your own desperation, but it will backfire. You can't lie to your own audience and take them for granted, as Ms. Maddow did and as the Today Show does, and expect them to remain loyal to you.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, because, look, you can have opinions. I've got a ton of them. I made a living on my opinions. I think that's legitimate. What you can't do is lie.
Exactly.
You're not allowed to lie. You're not allowed to say something is true when you know it's not. You can also make mistakes, which I've done many times.
Yes.
But you can't do it intentionally. And by the way, nobody asked them about this. They never apparently did an internal investigation, or at least never announced the results of it. And no other news organization said, how did this tape get to the Washington Post? I don't remember any questions about that.
Exactly. And this is when an audience, you've got a diverse audience, or even if you've got an audience that agrees with you politically, there is still an expectation of some level of transparency.
Yes.
They want to believe that, in fact, you might not even agree with what's being said, or like you said, if it's maybe even just opinion, but the moment you feel that you're being taken along kind of a sideshow, and you've got some snake oil salesmen, and you're being taken for granted, and what Ms. Maddow did, which is draw her audience along, the only fit person that was exposed that night, of course, was Rachel Maddow, and the only people that were taken advantage of that night was her audience. And for NBC as an entity, you can see it's infected every network, and I think it's probably infected the nature of their on-air talent in general. Desperation for ratings, desperation to achieve their goal, which
Right.
in this case is not information to impart, but to harm the President of the United States.
I think that's right. I mean, how much better would it have been if, they said, look, we thought he paid no taxes, he paid 25%. I don't know. It's kind of interesting. I would have watched it, but instead, you got to hype it to the point of dishonesty.
Exactly.
Tammy, thank you. Great to see you.
Thank you, Tucker.
Up next, the tolerance police fired a University of Wisconsin lacrosse employee because she defended President Trump's policies. We'll have her on after the break. Well, the forces of tolerance have struck again, this time in the state of Wisconsin. Until last week, Kim Dearman worked as a police dispatcher for the University of Wisconsin lacrosse. But after Dearman defended President Trump's executive order on immigration, the first one, to a coworker, the school informed her she would be fired for using, quote, threatening or abusive language. Today, the school's chancellor, Joe Gow, hastily offered Dearman her job back, saying she shouldn't have been canned without a hearing, you think? Kim Dearman and her attorney, Lee Fear, join us from La Crosse, Wisconsin. Kim and Lee, thanks a lot for joining us. So, Kim, this is apparently you've been offered your job back because you didn't have a hearing, but this was after the university explained that you had threatened and intimidated people. Tell us your version of what happened.
Hi, Tucker. I had received the same email that everybody else had received in the university system regarding Chancellor Gow's opinion and his apology, and I had a casual conversation with the young lady that I was training, that I had hired to work in our department, and apparently she was offended by me indicating that I thought terrorists or immigrants should be sent back to their Middle Eastern country.
So that's what, excuse me, that's what you said? You said terrorists or immigrants should be sent back to their countries?
I said, yes, terrorists should be sent back to should not be allowed into this country, and
Right.
any type of terrorist in this country should be sent back.
Huh. And then she tattled on you to the school which fired you. Is that right?
Apparently, yes.
So, Lee, can you do that? It's pretty hard to fire people anywhere for expressing agreement with the presidential policy. That's grounds for firing in Wisconsin?
Well, they clearly did not use the standards that they should have, and they did not follow their protocol. They were one of the problems here is that we don't know what the standard is. We don't know what Mr. Gow will be offended by. It could be anything. Apparently the word immigrant is racist, according to what I've come to understand, and that immigrants going back to their country is a racist thought that should not be expressed in modern America, even though saying that immigrants should go back to where they came from is just talk, and President Obama sent millions of people back to where they came from.
Right.
President Clinton sent 13 or 14 million people back to where they came from.
Well, I guess what
I'm not sure why their actions are okay. My client's words are not okay. The president or the chancellor of the university who spoke, his emails are just fine, even though he retracted them and apologized to the state of Wisconsin.
So, I mean, I guess what I'm struck by here is that you're not a tenured professor. You're a police dispatcher. I don't know how much you make, but a lot less than a tenured professor. And here is this guy with lifetime employment with a high salary disagreeing with you and just stamping you out, just crushing you. Do you want to go back to work there after this?
You know, I've intentionally wanted my job back in the beginning, but now I'm worried about going back and being let go for basically any type of reason.
Right. I noticed that he, in the note announcing you're being fired, said you had poor job performance. What do you think of that?
I take offense to it. I had received a communication from my direct supervisor in December indicating that my performance was superior.
Yeah, well, that was was before you agreed with Trump. Big mistake. Thanks, Kim, and good luck. I hate to see this. Thank you. Thanks. Well, up next, it seems every day the press is hyping a new scandal you're supposed to care deeply about. And now one enterprising journalist has created a website that will remind you what was supposedly the end of the world just 2 weeks ago. Because you can't remember, there's too much. We'll talk to her next.
Because when I say things, the press doesn't cover it accurately. They cover it very inaccurately. Much of the press. Some of the press, by the way, some of the finest people I know are reporters. Reporters are wonderful. I'm talking about the fake media, the fake news. And there's a lot of fake news.
Well, it seems like the sky has been falling every day since last November's election, yet somehow the sky never actually lands, we've noticed. America's premier news outlets hype every story as a huge deal, only for each to be discarded like trash when a younger, more attractive story comes along. Well, now one writer is holding the press to account. Renee James is her name, and she's the founder of 2weeksagonews.com. The website's purpose is to remind you of all the stories that were super important just 2 weeks ago, and yet that you cannot remember now because maybe they weren't that important. Renee James, who is doing America a service, joins us tonight. Renee, I love the idea of this site. It's so fantastic because even in the news business, it's like, wait, we were supposed to mourn the end of democracy when that happened. Now I can't remember the details. So what should we have remembered but didn't for the last month?
Oh, gosh, there's a lot, Tucker. So what we try to do is pick the thing that was really all over social media, whether it was Twitter or Facebook or what have you, and really just try to sort through, because there's a lot, like you said, there's an awful lot. We try to sort through, but, you know, one of our favorites was the Nordstrom story. Right? How we all had to stop shopping at Nordstrom right away because they carried Ivanka Trump products, and that's a bad thing. So it was enormous. It was outrageous. It was constant. And it was effective. I mean, Nordstrom said, got it, got it, got it, got it. We're dropping everything. Now, I don't know why they did, but they did. And the question is this. Fine. You don't have to shop at Nordstrom. You don't have to buy her line. It's all fine. But no one said anything about Bloomingdale's. Nobody said anything about Lord & Taylor. Nobody said anything about DSW. Nobody said anything about Bye Bye Baby. Nobody said anything about Bed Bath & Beyond. It's like all these people are involved. So what is the... It's just disingenuous, and it seems to me... I don't get it. So there's the story.
I'd forgotten about Nordstrom Gate entirely. What else have I forgotten about?
How could you forget? How could you forget Nordstrom? You do remember how he asked women to wear a dress, right? Everybody had to dress like a woman. Do you remember that?
Vaguely.
Okay, that was a very big deal.
I was deeply upset about it. Yeah, I vaguely remember that.
Because it was more than 2 weeks ago, so that's ancient history. But when it was 2 weeks old, we talked about it, and, you know, that was, again, enormous. And on Facebook, you know, women were outraged. And the truth of it is, it's a very odd statement to make. I get that. It's a very sort of sexist statement. It's a very sort of, you don't understand why he made it. So, you know, we thought, well, when did he make it? When did he say something so ridiculous and misguided? We looked and we looked and we looked and we looked and we looked, and you know what? He didn't. Okay? It was somebody
Maybe
heard,
that's why I didn't
and somebody...
remember.
Maybe that's why you didn't remember it. And it was somebody heard that he said, and da-da-da-da-da. And I just thought, you know, it's fine if it's sort of that, but you know what? He didn't say it. So I concede that, you know, saying it was dumb, or even having that thought is probably not smart. If everybody else will concede that we have no idea what the dress code is in the White House.
Okay, so wreck my night.
Right?
Wreck my night, Renee. Tell me one more story that I was really upset about, but can't recall now because I'm getting old.
Do you remember that the world was ending because the White House stopped talking to the press? Right?
Yeah.
Everybody was kicked out. Everybody was kicked out. That was a very big deal.
Right.
Okay? I haven't heard one word since about anybody being kicked out.
But you know what,
maybe
though?
I'm missing it.
I'll be totally honest. I remember where I was when that happened. It was like the JFK assassination.
Yeah.
It was like when Princess Di died. That was a big moment for me. Renee, thank you for remembering, even if the aged among us can't. Great to see you tonight.
You're welcome. Thanks, Tucker.
Coming up next, are foreign workers improving the lot of native-born Americans or just keeping wages down? Well, it turns out somebody decided to check. And the numbers are interesting. Stay tuned for that.